start with Attorney General William Barr, who will testify before the Senate Appropriations Committee this morning after yesterday's hearing before its counterpart in the House, where Barr said the process of redacting the Mueller report is going, quote, very well. He stood by his decision to withhold an unknown amount of its material from Congress.
My original timetable of being able to release this by mid-April stands. And so I think that from my standpoint, within a week, I will be in a position to release the report to the public. We intend to redact information that implicates the privacy or reputational interests of peripheral players where there is a decision not to charge them. We will color code the excisions from the report, and we will provide explanatory notes describing the basis for each redaction.
Will we have the complete report? Or are you going to be selective as to what you give members of Congress?
You mean the unredacted report?
Mm-hmm.
No, as I said, I'm glad to talk to Chairman Nadler and Chairman Graham as to whether they feel they need more information and see if there's a way we could accommodate that. It's interesting because this whole mechanism for the special counsel, as I said, was established during the Clinton administration in the wake of Ken Starr's report. And that's why the current rule says that the report should be kept confidential. And many of the people who are right now calling for release of this report were basically castigating Ken Starr and others for releasing the Starr report. I have already said that I think the situation here requires me to exercise my discretion to get as much information out as I can.
In his testimony, Attorney General Barr seemed to dare House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler to issue a subpoena for the full report and underlying materials, to which Nadler reacted this way.
Are you intending to go to court to ask for guidance and or direction and or an order where you are uncertain whether you can in fact release or should in fact release materials?
Well, but I mean, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee is free to go to court if he feels one of those exceptions is applicable.
It's your right to ask. So I'm asking, what is your intention?
My intention is not to ask for it at this stage.
Congress has need of the entire report, including the grand jury material, including all the including everything, and I presume we're going to get the redacted report within a week. When we do so, if we don't get everything, we will issue the subpoena and go to court.
Joyce Vance, let's start with you on this and your impressions generally of Attorney General Barr's performance yesterday. He says he's going to have this report out within a week. I think you probably agree as a prosecutor there are elements of that report that should be redacted, classified material, perhaps secret grand jury testimony, things like that. But what concerned you as you listened to Attorney General Barr, if anything?
There's a really important distinction we need to draw here, and that's between the version of the report that's released to the public and the version of the report that becomes available to Congress. You know, Barr is focused almost exclusively in his testimony yesterday morning on getting a heavily redacted version of the report out to the public. And as you suggested, I would agree. Publicly, we don't want to see a broad release of grand jury without a court order. We don't want to see evidence that could implicate national security being publicly released. We don't even want to necessarily see public-made information about folks who were considered as targets but not indicted. That's the public release. The release to Congress is an entirely different story. Congress is entitled to a much broader dissemination of information. In fact, they have to have that information, including grand jury, including national security, so that they can fulfill their oversight function and make the decision that Bob Mueller appears to have left to them. The Attorney General, who sort of committed to transparency during his confirmation hearings, at least in a broad sense, really walked that back back yesterday. And I think it'll ultimately be unsatisfactory in terms of both the report that's released publicly and clearly in what goes to Congress.
All right, Jonathan Lemire, you have new reporting for the Associated Press that Trump's victory lap over the Mueller probe may have been just a little bit premature. And now with the full report likely to be released in the coming days, fears among Trump allies are growing. Are they stepping up their attack sort of to get ready for this, to brace people for it?
Right. What we've seen here is when Barr put out his summary, 4-page letter 2 weeks ago, the White House and the Trump allies immediately seized upon it. It was a deliberate attempt to try to frame the story, to get out ahead of it, to sort of spin it their way. And we saw a few days later, the president had a campaign rally in Michigan where he opened up with a 15-minute screed suggesting that he had been cleared. He used the phrase total exoneration, which of course the Mueller report and the Barr summary does not use, and you started to use it to start pounding his allies, his adversaries, I should say. But what has happened since is fears have grown among Trump allies, Republicans on the Hill, about what else is going to be in this report. 400-odd pages and stuff that's not going to be redacted, and that perhaps it's not going to rise to the level of criminality, but will be potentially embarrassing, politically damaging for both him and those close to him in the White House, perhaps as well some of his family members. So what we have seen here in the last couple of weeks is we've gone from Trump the day after the Barr summary, calling Bob Mueller an honorable man. He thought he conducted himself in honorable fashion. We have seen the attacks step up again, whether it's on Twitter. Rudy Giuliani told me, he said he's ready to open fire again on Mueller, that they want to attack, they have been and will continue to attack the credibility of the investigators to therefore undermine the conclusions.
And here we go. So Michael Steele, politically for Democrats, what's the risk that they overplay their hand here? There can be a slow and methodical and consistent effort to see the entire report, but isn't there a risk again to overplay?
No, there is, and that's always sort of the edge that the Democrats find themselves walking on, the measure to which they, ramp up hearings, the measure to which they go after getting the Mueller report. Look, they have the public behind them on this. The public wants to see this report released, as much of it as possible. As has already been pointed out, they have, under the current situation, the current laws, the opportunity to see a broader report than the one we may see here in the public as part of their oversight. So play to that strength that they have. One, the American people behind them for the release of the report, and two, what they're entitled to in their oversight function. There's no need to start throwing around subpoenas loosely or giving the impression that they're creating a drama around something that may not be as dramatic in the end.
John Meacham, it's interesting that the Attorney General raises the specter of trying to compare the Starr report to the Mueller report in his testimony yesterday, when the differences between both reports, the subject matter of both reports, is striking.
It's striking. It's also one similarity could be that neither would be an extra lost chapter in Profiles in Courage. Right? So, to say the least. And as President Kennedy used to say, there's a reason Profiles in Courage was one volume. There's not a lot of examples out there. I think what Jonathan just said is exactly right. There's no question that this is going to be politically embarrassing. There's just, again, it's not going to be the sign of Donald. This is not going to be a story about how Donald Trump stood up and said, "No, I shall not receive any help from Russia because I am an American." That's not going to be there. So the underlying story. So I think one of the things that's going to happen is everybody's going to jump on that. But the central story, which I think is behind your question, is that this is a foreign power that has successfully projected soft power to affect our decision making, and why it is. This was the 7,000th time someone said this today, probably already, why it is that the party of Reagan that did so much to end the Cold War has become so acclimated to Russian advances in power and interfering with our elections is one of the great mysteries of the age.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.